Welcome to Redefine the Circle, a podcast where we discuss all things pitching. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development at S2 Breakthrough. In this podcast, we're going to highlight topics that focus on how to maximize your pitchers now. We're going to discuss some of the trends that we've seen at S2 Breakthrough and talk about how we use data to create systems and training approaches that are specific to each pitcher. It's so important for us to continue to share this information and facilitate discussion within the pitching community so we can keep evolving as coaches and ultimately grow pitching into something it's never been before. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for joining the quest to redefine the circle. Hi everyone, welcome back to Redefine the Circle. I'm Ashley Sunshine, co-owner and head of pitching development here at S2 Breakthrough. We are in our final episode here of Series 4, where we want to continue to talk about roadmaps and what that means as far as being able to design training programs for our pitchers and really understand the right stepping stones that we need to lay out in front of them in order to get them from where they are currently to where they need to be. Now, in previous episodes, I've really talked about roadmaps with some higher level concepts, whether it's chasing velo, really trying to grow somebody's pitch profile, really helping a pitcher be able to establish her strength or keep her strength while we're trying to grow something else. Variety of concepts that are very much higher level concepts, higher level like ball flight data types of concepts. And of course, we talked about how patterns and arm segmentation are all part of the roadmap. So the ultimate goal was to get, to that piece where we were able to really make their ball flight, maximize it, and be able to get it to be something that really stands out and is special. In today's episode, I want to sort of take a couple steps back and talk about a middle school pitcher. And the reason for that is because I believe that sort of the challenges that we have a lot of times with the pitching world, the pitching community, whether it's that we don't have enough pitchers who really stand out or have something special, the pitching staffs are too small, whether at the summer ball level or a college level. It's a complicated conversation, but I think a big piece of that conversation comes back to the fact that we sort of do the wrong things or led in the wrong direction. We have the wrong roadmaps laid out in front of us for our younger pitchers. And I want to bring that to light today. I'm going to show a case study of a middle school pitcher, how we would typically attack that pitcher in a way that sometimes is a little bit like maybe too passive for some people. They feel as if it's not aggressive enough. And I want to really be able to explain why it's really important to take the approach that we do here at S2 Breakthrough with these young pitchers so that we ultimately can get them to a point where we're talking about things in their roadmap like, increasing velo and maximizing break and changing up spin direction for multiple pitches. The way to get there is to do it right early on. And so I'm going to walk through that case study and to really just be able to show you what I think that approach should be and how it differs from sort of the typical approaches that we see at this level, this sort of like middle school level. So in today's case study, again, it's a middle school athlete, and she came to us really, I would say raw. And we're really excited when we see athletes come to us in that stage. What I mean by raw is she didn't have any patterns that were really like alarming or needed to be undone. She was about a year post her first period. I've talked about this many times on previous episodes in previous series. And the reason why that's really important is because we need to know, how far past that first period a pitcher is because, it usually takes about 6 months up to sometimes 12 to 18 months for her body to be able to stabilize, both from a standpoint of, how much she's growing, the mass that she's putting on, how that mass is distributed across the body, and for her to really have a sense of, to stabilize and all that change, and then to be able to really feel like where her body is in space. And so this pitcher was right about at that point, and she was, kind of like unstable and off balance in her motion. So she felt like she had command issues, control issues. Of course, that sort of comes with the territory, but no crazy patterns that had to be undone. And that's exciting for us, as I said, at S2 Breakthrough, because it feels as if we can sort of like get pitchers early enough at that stage where we can start them at the bottom of the process and do it right. And instead of getting them when it might be, I don't want to say too late because things can always be undone, but it's a much more difficult process to have to undo something and then build it up. It's just way easier and more efficient to just build it up right from the start. So middle school athlete in this sort of raw phase, nothing much to that story because, typically we see there's a lot of similarities across our athletes. It's really why we don't give our full assessment to pitchers until they are at least 13 years old, making sure that essentially they are far enough away from that first period that we know their story is starting to become individualized. Not a lot of individuality yet early on in a pitcher's process, and that's really where this athlete was as well. So turning our eyes to the screen here, what we see on the left-hand side is the assessment. And this is pretty typical. Like, you're going to see reds all the way down here. This is sagittal plane. This means her posture was really compromised. On the ground, anterior core was severe, meaning really struggled to be able to manage anterior core regardless of the exercise. In the air, controlling the trunk when she was landing, both with 2 feet and 1 foot, wasn't able to control posture. And all of these Fs are frontal plane. This is really like knee collapse. So knee collapsing on the ground, knee collapsing in the air. Just a really unstable athlete, not atypical. This is really what we would expect to see of an athlete of her age. And so we know the approach right away for an athlete, again, of this age with this level of instability. We're going to put her in what we call like our next gen program. Next gen program is really just like before the program becomes highly individualized. And the focus is very much on strength and conditioning, the ability to just understand where your body is in space, to be able to essentially work gradually with your body out as it's continuing to change, be able to sort of like work through that time period of like what we might label as like an awkward phase, or that she's all over the place. She's falling. She's doing things when she's sort of just past the first period. We sort of walk them through that time period by just getting them to make sure they're doing age appropriate strength and conditioning, or I should say developmentally appropriate. And again, just kind of really being able to walk through that and come out with much better body awareness. And so from that standpoint, that's where the focus of the program, the focus of the roadmap, and pitching is on the back burner. Now, when people come, they're coming for pitching. And so it's really important for us that we are giving them pitching, but it's important that for the sake of the athlete, whether the families understand it or not, that pitching is on the back burner. If we ultimately want this pitcher to be able to achieve her goals down the road, if we want her roadmap to lead to things like maximizing break and different spin directions and increasing velo, then we have to make sure pitching stays on the back burner for a pretty long time when she's early in her journey. And that's just an uncomfortable conversation, uncomfortable process for a lot of families. They want pitching front and center all the time. And so what we do in this next gen program is again, strength and conditioning is at the forefront, and then our pitchers come into their skill, and it's really just based on freedom of movement. They're just throwing a lot of plyos, not a lot of drills. We're letting them sort of explore the way their body moves. So essentially, as strength and conditioning is really holding their hand while their body is changing, and they're really trying to figure out where it is in space, they're getting that same freedom to sort of feel how that body translates into the motion without us really like being, attacking them with certain, anything in particular to them. It's just like, let it keep evolving, keep exploring different movement solutions, keep working on stability enough to accomplish a task. Those are really the concepts that we work on in pitching. So it's really free. It's really sort of like simple and free, but it's important that it's that way. And I'll explain that in just a bit. So that's the approach that we took with that athlete. As you know, we do with many of our athletes who come in, and from a middle school standpoint, again, it's important to note that she didn't have any patterns that had to be undone. She was just sort of from the start, very raw, and we're kind of working her up that journey. Now, she was doing great. Of course, we measure things a lot for these athletes. It's different for our older athletes. They're in the know. They watch their every move. They see their data. They understand their data. With our middle school athletes, when we're taking data on them, it's mostly just in the background. It's for us to inform us and to collect data on that age group, and then also to just kind of give us an idea of when that athlete might be ready to move into something a little bit more individualized. And so, yes, we do collect data, but it just happens in a little bit of different process. And so this athlete was certainly doing a good job, and she was stabilizing a lot more. In my mind, it just was like, the program looks good. We're just going to stay on it. Now, what I had just showed here was like the spring of 2021. And then by that summer, that athlete and her family came to me and said, her coach this year said that next year, she's not going to make the team. This is a 14U team. She's not going to make the team unless she has more pitch type. So she can't just come in with fastball changeup. And so I think this is a really interesting conversation because, it's important. We can't just say things to pitchers like, well, your coach doesn't know anything. That's not a healthy environment, healthy conversations to be having. And so it's important to really try to be able to explain. And so what I explained to this athlete and her family is that, listen, what we think of as pitch types are not really pitch types. And this is complicated, but most people are just naming pitches certain things, and they're just basically angling a fastball in different directions. And so the problem with that is that that's not real. And so it might seem real when you're young, but as you're getting older and you're really trying to have something special about you that stands out, that really lowers your ceiling. And so we don't want to take that approach. What we're doing at S2 is really taking a slow, gradual, progressive approach to you getting better. Take your time early on and those things can come. But of course, I want you to make the team. And so I know that conversation is not going to be sufficient for your team coach. And so as a result, let's sort of find a hybrid. And so what we did with this pitcher, we took a slow, progressive approach to her getting better. And so it's important, to sort of like find the middle ground, because we know that that's the best approach for the athlete, but we also want to make sure we're not saying, hey, trust us. And so it's okay if you don't make your 14U team next year. She wants to make that 14U team next year. So here's the approach that we really communicated with her. And I think it's just an interesting conversation. So what I said was, your coach, unfortunately, not because he's not a good coach, but because, at the sort of younger levels in travel ball, they don't have access to ball flight data. This stuff is kind of new and most people aren't really aware of this. So, he says, for example, that she needs a rise ball. So I know from my standpoint, she's super unstable. I'm looking at her instability just in her assessment, that she no way has the level of stability that she would need in the pitching motion. So even though she doesn't have poor patterns, she's literally like falling in the pitching motion just from being unstable. There's no sense of like control over the arm action, hand positioning, like knowing how many things go into being able to create something like a rise ball. It's just like comical. But I do think that we have a responsibility not to just like say that. It puts the athlete in a weird position, as if we are sort of holding ourselves over top of their coaches. And so instead of saying like, that's a crazy request, is what I said is, it sounds to me like your coach, they really want you to throw something up in the zone. And so let's just add something that you feel we can add a little bit into training, where you feel like you're in a little bit more control of being able to throw the ball up versus down. And to the extent that you want to say that up pitch is a rise ball to your coach, go ahead. If you feel like just by saying I have a rise ball now makes you a candidate to make the team next year when it goes from 13 to 14U, that is what your coach requires, then go ahead and do that, and we can work on just trying to control the ball up. But I need you to understand that's not actually a rise ball. It's okay to say it, but it's not actually a rise ball. And in the long term, we can't take that approach. We can't just call a pitch and pretend as if you're ready to really spin the ball and control the ball like that. And so I think she sort of got that process. And so in order to really, I'm going to slide my view back over here to the screen, to really, really hammer that point home, I let her throw the rise ball, and I showed her here. Like, here's what your fastball does. This is not significant. Just a down spinning pitch. You're throwing the ball up in the zone. You're calling it a rise. It's not doing anything. And that's okay. And so I think the data for her showing her that was really great, to just be able to show her like, if this accomplishes both, you're going to keep your buy-in for like sort of slowly progressing through training in the S2 way, because we know we can't just call pitches and pretend they're something they're not. But your coach is saying that they want you to have a rise ball, and we're going to say what he really means there is that he wants you to have a pitch up. So we'll do that too. So that's how I really laid that out for her. But we didn't work on rise, other than just like when she threw fastballs full, we just kind of worked on, okay, this next one, try to throw 3 up, 3 down. And she just tried to work on a little bit more control over that height, which in and itself was difficult for her with her level of stability.
Redefine the Circle is brought to you by Rapsodo Softball. Whether it's at the plate or in the circle, Rapsodo delivers all the data needed to enhance your players' development and to give us a platform to become more informed and better coaches. Rapsodo pitching is absolutely critical when it comes to maximizing your pitchers. In addition to measuring velocity, pitchers and coaches get a detailed look at all of the ball metrics that influence break: spin rate, spin direction, gyro degree, spin efficiency. Together, these metrics tell a story about a pitcher's data profile. And to grow that profile and ultimately maximize what that pitcher can become, understanding the metrics is a must. Rapsodo not only provides high-level feedback in the moment, but also creates back-end reports so coaches and athletes can visualize and fully understand the entire story and how it's progressing. Rapsodo is such a powerful tool. Instant data, relevant metrics, innovative visuals, and don't forget the in-app slow-mo video that allows pitchers to watch their pitching patterns right alongside the ball flight metrics they yield. Bottom line, Rapsodo is a must-have in the world of player development. See the data, feel the results with Rapsodo's softball technology.
And so I think the reason why this is important to bring up is because we see this so frequently. Now, this pitcher developmentally with her level of stability, like who she is going to be as a like late high school or college pitcher, if that's the route that she chooses, is so far from who she is now. And we can see that so clearly. Yet at this youth level, at this 14U level, we're treating her as if like, you're 14U, you need to have a rise, you need to have a drop, you need to have this. Like, there's so many things that are wrong with that. One, not only does, not every pitcher needs to have the exact same pitches, but also like, she's so early in her journey. She's so raw. She's only a year after her first period. We could see like there's so much instability with her motion. We just need to give her time to just sort of like stabilize and see what she could really become, to see what her neutrals are. What does her fastball sort of naturally do? Because sometimes pitchers, all of a sudden, they naturally start to have some backspin, which is amazing. Maybe it stays some topspin and we start to grow upon that. We just have to let them first stabilize. That's the roadmap we're talking about. And then we can start going into like, what's their neutral once they're stable, and what's the first place we can start with. So as far as I'm concerned, this pitcher pitching was not even in her roadmap yet. Pitching was all just in the background, having her throw, but throw with some freedom, not placing anything in particular on her. We're just letting her body sort through things. And while she's simultaneously just in like a very front and center strength and conditioning roadmap piece. So here I am thinking that pitching's not even on the roadmap, but her coach in the summer ball is telling her, like, you have to have a rise ball. It's just such a disconnect, and really just doing our athletes such a disservice for so many reasons. So we stayed on this approach. She kept buying into what she was doing, slow and steady. And I'm going to actually go back to the assessment results that I showed earlier. And this time, let's take our focus to 5-5, which was just, earlier in this month. And this is almost about a year later here. And like, look how much she's cleaned up. She's still just in 8th grade. We are looking at her being totally clean here in the ground. Anterior core has cleaned up significantly. No frontal plane issues at all in the assessment. Even posture, the sagittal plane is starting to clean up in the jumps. Like, she's just incredibly, like, such a better athlete, so much more stable now than she was just a year ago. And we have not taken any different approach with her from a pitching standpoint. Her training sessions look almost identical today than they did a year ago. And I know, like, in normal pitching lesson world, that would be crazy. People would be like, are looking for new drills and something different and catchy every day, every week. But for her, we knew like she's just in this process. And it really wasn't until a year later where things really not only started to stabilize, but she started to grow as an athlete. And that started to translate into her pitching motion. There's no doubt about it. So it was at that point then that we're like, okay, here's where you are now. Now I feel like we can start talking about pitching. There's no like patterns to work on necessarily. The pattern piece in pitching is really being covered by strength and conditioning and continual strength and conditioning. There was nothing to undo. And so we're just going to continue to do all the things we were doing, lots of plyos, lots of focus on tasks, a lot of freedom of movement type of work. That's all the way you're just going to keep gradually building your patterns. We're not undoing anything, which is amazing. So that's how we're going to go from there. Meanwhile, as we take our gaze over here, this is the data that we have on her. And so meanwhile, you can see here as I'm looking at her velo at the top, this was about the time frame that we had started in this like April of 2021 here. And you could see like how her velo was changing during this period of time, this about 6 months or so, because she was just after her first period. This is where all of a sudden she's growing, she's gaining a ton of mass. And now basically about the last fall until now, this is where you're going to see it stabilize. And we've talked about this in previous episodes. This is what happens with pitchers, just biology. This is not like, oh, now all of a sudden the training program doesn't work. It's just that this was the period of time where her body was changing so much and now she's stable. And so really from here on is sort of the trend that we're going to be able to start tracking for her. But velo was looking good. She was sitting like, anywhere from low to mid 40s up to 50s early on, just tons of variability. And you can see she's starting to stabilize here a little bit in sort of these like mid 50s, which is a great spot for her to be in for now based on her size, and she's not even in high school yet. And so we're taking a look at that. We're watching how this velo trend continues to stabilize, and eventually we'll watch for its growth. And then here, because I knew that she had stabilized so much from her assessment standpoint and that she had no patterns to undo, we just started talking about, okay, your fastball is just naturally a down pitch. It's a topspin pitch. What happens if we sort of add the intent to add a little bit more sync to it. And we started to add this conversation about drop. And then what do you know? She all of a sudden has something that is kind of, just like on the map, I would say. It's about 5-6 inches of sync, 3 inches of horizontal. That's all just naturally when she has the intent to throw something with sync. This is what happens. It's a little off speed. She throws this probably about 5 miles per hour less than her fastball. And by no means am I trying to sit here and be like, look, she has this incredible drop ball. What I'm trying to say is she has maybe something interesting on the mat already. Could that change? Yeah, of course. She's still just in 8th grade, but this is the way to do it. Some pitchers will go their entire careers without anything interesting. But the fact that we are just gradually letting this process go for her roadmap is slow and steady. And now we're like, okay, let's just add a little intent. And it's not with weighted balls. We're not doing anything aggressive like that. If we get to the point where like, okay, it's 2 years later, this drop ball has about 5 inches of break and we need it to have like 6 to 7, 6 to 8. Now let's take some of the approaches that we talked about in previous episodes. Let's go some weighted balls. Let's really take a more aggressive approach to being able to expand that pitch. But in my mind, she's still in middle school. Like, the fact that she even has a down pitch, she commands this down in the zone. It has some interesting break on it. Like, she's just laying foundations down to who the pitcher she ultimately wants to be, instead of trying to make her everything right away. And I think that's the process that we see all too often. I'm going to scroll across, and what we're going to see, this is not the same pitcher. This is a different pitcher. This is another middle school pitcher that we get or that we had for an assessment here at S2 Breakthrough. And this is very much something that we see a lot here. So this is a pitcher who plays for one of the higher level teams in the country as a 14-year-old. So same age as the athlete that we talked about over here, who's just sort of on this slow organic growth model. And this athlete here came to us, you can see fast, drop, curve, rise, change over here, and everything is just clustered. In addition to her pitches being clustered together and her not actually spinning things any different, one pitch different than another, she had a very similar movement capacity profile as the pitcher I showed before, a lot of breakdowns in red. She also had really tough patterns, over-rotated so quickly in her pitching motion, had a really severely bent arm path because of that. And so the amount of work that we are now doing, so this athlete turned into a remote athlete of ours, and we're working with her, so unlike the athlete before her, who was very much in the same age and developmental track, this athlete, because she took sort of the wrong approach, her roadmap early on became all about pitching mechanics and number of pitches and throwing as hard as you possibly can. Like everything, basically trying to put a maturity on her that she wasn't ready for. Now we're spending our time trying to undo. And so if this pitcher becomes 2 years down the line, a sophomore in high school, and we start creating something special from her ball flight data with a healthy arm, she already has some back pain, some arm pain. If we can get rid of that type of stuff and still get her to have, pitch profile that stands out, in my mind, that would be such an overwhelming success versus the pitcher beforehand where we're just in this gradual journey already to having that, and there's nothing to undo. So I just think this is incredibly important. The fact that it's so challenging with high school athletes to find someone that has something special. This scenario that I just showed, sort of the comparison pitcher, is a perfect example of that. When the roadmap is laid out for our young pitchers in the wrong way, in the wrong order, when pitching is just piled on, you need this pitch type, that what happens is they're just not ready for that. The motion is way too complicated. It's way too demanding. And as a result, what they try to do with their bodies in order to accomplish that ends up lowering their ceiling. It lessens the pool of pitchers that we have across the country. It makes the staffs that we're working with, both at the summer ball and the college level, smaller and smaller. It's just a really, really big challenge. And so I wanted to bring up this discussion again because I think it's such a foundational concept. Even if you're a parent and your daughter is past this sort of foundational age, or you're a college coach and of course you're not working with athletes this young, I still think it's a really important conversation to know that when we're talking about roadmaps, we're not just talking about maximizing performance and pitch profiles at the highest of levels. We have to also understand that roadmaps go all the way to understanding, being able to lay out someone's journey for them. Here is sort of the macro level of what your roadmap is. First, it's strength and conditioning. Pitching's on the back burner. Here's how we're going to handle it. Here's what you're going to do in pitching. When you hit this milestone and this starts to stabilize, we're going to put pitching up a little bit, but this is what that looks like. It's like the macro level first and then the micro level. And I felt like the episodes leading up to this were very sort of like micro level roadmaps. And today I wanted to sort of take an approach that was a little bit broader and to show that macro level. And so we can see like we have to put the brakes on with our younger pitchers. The roadmaps that we are laying out for them as a pitching community are actively squashing who they can become in the future. So preserve them as long as possible from this, shouting from the rooftops. The 14U level travel ball scene is not important in their careers from the sense of whether or not they have 3 pitches, 5 pitches, whatever that might be. It is so important that we understand that we want to make sure that whoever we are, coach, parent, instructor, whatever, however we support that athlete, that we understand sort of where she is in her journey, and that what we're doing is allowing her to keep moving ahead, not just ahead like for the weekend, but across the board at that macro level in her journey. And so I just want to keep emphasizing that and hope we can all get on the same page regarding like what we should be doing with these young athletes, particularly sort of like this middle school, before they really start to need an individualized story. So leaving you with that discussion today, hope that really sums up just generally like what we even mean by laying out training roadmaps and making sure that we are not taking a cookie cutter approach, not just to mechanics, but as far as like what pitchers need to be achieving. The more conversations we have about that, the better, the more that we can sort of start to put our athletes in a position where they're not hearing different messages or different demands are being placed on them all across, depending on who they're talking to. I think that's really, really critical. So being able to grow pitching as a whole and at the elite level means that we also have to understand what some of the issues are all the way to the root of the issue, all the way to this sort of like when we have 12, 13, 14-year-old pitchers, what's going on there? And how can we make sure that we have more pitchers a part of the pool with a lot of interesting things to only grow our game and grow the position as a whole? So again, wrapping up this series with that discussion, love to hear your feedback. As always, we are going to be launching Series 5 here in just a few weeks, where we're going to be talking a little bit more about the concept of roots and symptoms, so specifically about the motion itself, the biomechanics, what things look like from a lever standpoint versus a trunk standpoint. I think this discussion is going to be really, really exciting for all of our viewers out there. So as always, if you only listen to today's episode, be sure to check out our YouTube so you can follow along on any of the visuals. And between now and our next episode, remember to keep questing on to redefine the circle. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I'd love to connect and hear your feedback. You can contact me directly at ashley@s2breakthrough.com. If you're listening, you can leave us a review, or if you're watching, go ahead and leave a comment below. Also, be sure to follow S2 Breakthrough on all of our social media channels and subscribe to Stream S2 to find all things player development. Until next time, quest on.